There's a ton of noise out there. So how do you get decision makers to pay attention to your brand? Start a podcast and invite your ideal clients to be guests on your show. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I am your host for today's episode, Nikki Ivy with Sweet Fish. How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to talk to you. This topic is one that's really close to my heart. We're going to be talking a little bit about inclusion and how to make that part of the DNA of your company. But before we get into all of that, Meghan, I would love to hear you just talk a little bit about your background and what you and the folks at HubSpot have been up to these days.
Sure. Yeah. So thanks for having me. My name is Meghan Keaney Anderon. I'm one of the VPs of marketing at HubSpot. And HubSpot is essentially a growth platform that companies can use to really align their success with their customers. And so included in that platform is marketing tools, sales tools, customer service tools, all baked into a core customer database, a CRM, that really helps you make sure that all your marketing and your sales and your services is rooted in the customer, so you actually have context and you're not harassing or interrupting your customers. So HubSpot's a growth platform for kind of growing companies, medium and beyond, and it starts free and then grows with you. My world at HubSpot is I focus on a lot of our content strategy and awareness. I focus on product marketing and customer education. And I've been with the company for about 8 years. So it's been really interesting to see us sort of grow and learn along the way and get better.
It's interesting you mentioned content. And by the way, before I move on, I just want to give a little shameless plug. I've seen HubSpot used in many different capacities at many different organizations. And it's no wonder that you guys are, around and breaking through the noise is people's tech stack grows and grows. And first, just talk a little bit about how you guys incorporate diversity and inclusion into your company goals and how other folks can follow suit.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I want to say that, my role is I don't have diversity and inclusion in my title. We actually have someone at HubSpot who runs diversity and inclusion, but very much at HubSpot, diversity and inclusion and belonging is sort of embedded, or we try to embed it into everyone's responsibility. And so, I'm speaking to this as a team manager and a team lead, but it's very much reflected in the work that everyone does at HubSpot. You can't have a single person who owns this, because then it turns into that person's problem or that person's goal. We really wanted it to be the entire company's goal, because we've got a long way to go on it, to be honest. The tech industry as a whole is, not great when it comes to representation, when it comes to reflecting the audience that they serve in terms of their employees. So we, along with a bunch of other companies, have a long way to go. We wanted to make a real commitment to it. So how do we do that? We started off it's been a long-standing conversation and a long-standing development, but in the last couple of years, we actually added metrics for building a diverse and inclusive environment right into our company goals for the year, so that right up there with revenue and with customer retention, we have a commitment to the kind of company we want to build, and every team is accountable to those goals. So we have we call it an M-Spot. It's basically our charter for the year as a company, and then every team has their own version of that charter. So we've got diversity and inclusion at the company level. And then, when you go down to the marketing metrics as well, it's embedded into the things we're striving for as leaders on that team too. And it's not, having a number isn't the only way to do this, but we found in our history that if something really matters to us, putting a goal that we can aspire to and show progress at and knock ourselves if we're not making enough progress at it has been the difference between achieving something and not.
I love it. And you and I talked offline a little bit about some of the conversations that have been involved in when it comes to this, and putting a number to it is something that a lot of folks are kind of talking about, but it ends up being, an afterthought. So this idea that you bring up of making it a part of the mission and the goals from the very beginning is really exciting. What you mentioned before, what we talked about offline, is in addition to just personnel, when it comes to diversity and inclusion and putting a number on that, talked about this idea of ensuring that your content is representative. Dig into that a little bit for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So one more thing really quickly on the numbers that I'll say is we hold ourselves internally to it, but then we also have committed to externally being really transparent about how we're doing on that. So every year we put out a diversity and inclusion report that talks about how well HubSpot is progressing. And that's really helpful to make sure that people outside hold us accountable to these numbers and they're not just inside baseball. But the final thing I'll say on that is it's got to be more than numbers, right? I mean, the risk of just attaching a number to it is in minimizing how complex and important and layered this need, issue, and benefit is. And so I think when people are hesitant about attaching a number to diversity and inclusion, it's because they don't want to reduce it to just that. So we've made a real commitment to, this gets into the content and some other things, to making sure that it's more than just a number on our goals. So when you think about content, HubSpot we're a marketing, sales, and service platform, and we create a ton of content, and our content gets a lot of views. We're talking about millions and millions of people coming to our blog on a monthly basis. And that has influence. That has influence in the way that people see themselves. It has influence in the way that people see HubSpot. And we realized, a couple of years ago that our content, when we did things like top 10 lists of small businesses that use video well, or just the people that we were including in our social media content, we did an audit of it and we found that, man, it really was narrow in terms of the types of people that were and companies that were represented in that. And that reinforces a narrow view of who our customers are that's just really not accurate, right? So all of our content teams have made a commitment as part of their goals to make sure that their content is representative. Our social media team, for example, makes a lot of effort to recruit a variety of staffers inside HubSpot from all sorts of different age groups, ethnic backgrounds, life experiences, capabilities, to be stars in our YouTube videos and our Facebook videos and so forth. Our blogging team makes a special effort to expand their own readership so that they're not just reading the same blogs and pulling the same examples off the same blogs, so that they're reading blogs from, different parts of the world and bringing in businesses from Singapore and Brazil and Atlanta and Boston, and making sure that we reflect a more holistic understanding of how business and the economy works. And so those also have, they also have targets that they're aiming towards in terms of inclusion in that content. And frankly, it's just made a big difference in terms of quality of content. We're suddenly not just cookie cutter, the same old content on a different blog that everybody else can find anywhere. We're pulling in new, interesting angles that are original. And I think that has gone a long way, both in reflecting the type of company that we want to be, reflecting the customer base that we have, but also in just making better content.
Yeah, for sure. Because that's got to be the goal at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
I think you make such an interesting point when you say that at the same time as folks are being really mindful of what they're producing in terms of content, they're being mindful of what they're consuming and acknowledging that has a direct impact on, what they're going to produce, right? So like you said, if what you're consuming is narrow, then it stands to reason that what you produce will also be narrow. I don't hear a lot of people make that point when we have this discussion.
I think that's so important because listen, like if you don't expand the content you're consuming, then you end up in a land of tokenism, right? So if you're still consuming the same narrow content, but you're like, oh, it's important for me to include a Black-led business in this blog post, then you're just seeking out that business because the owner happens to be Black. And you're not actually infusing those different perspectives and those different businesses into your understanding of what it means to be a great business in America and the world. So we've tried to, as a company, help that along in terms of, we've got book groups that we have a free book program that allows people to request any book that they want. And we try to infuse a wide range of authors and business styles and books into that program. We have speaking programs that come in so that we're helping people who don't know where to begin in expanding their perspective, find those new influences and sources. So it's a much more of a, natural thing to create representative content because you are consuming representative content. And I think that matters. Again, this needs to be organic, and it needs to be, it's one thing to put numbers against something. It's one thing to try to become more inclusive, but you have to become more inclusive yourself in order to really get there.
Right. Yep. It cannot just be a means to an end. It can't just be optics. I get it. You know what? And this is something I recently started to really hold myself more accountable for, just out of necessity, right? I looked at, who I was following on LinkedIn. I looked at who was authoring the books in my Audible library, and it was pretty homogenous.
Yeah,
and it wasn't even people that looked like me at all, or had the same experience. And I had been bucking that system, right? Like, hey, people don't have to look like me or come from where I come from for me to learn from them. And I still believe that that's true, but there is. I had started to really internalize some inferiority, some imposter syndrome. Because, the people who I was putting in front of myself that were making it, that were achieving what I wanted to achieve, like I said, came from a pretty narrow, homogenous category. Yeah. And so I had to go to my LinkedIn network and be like, look, y'all, where are all the Black women at? Where can I where can I find these other folks? I know they're out there. And then I got a lot of help that way. So crowdsourcing worked for me there.
Yeah.
And that brings us to this next subject, because I know that this is difficult in a lot of organizations when it comes to getting everybody on board. And like you said, to understand that this is not just one person's or one department's initiative. What are the types of things that you found helpful? I know you mentioned bringing in speakers and things like that, to getting your team to feel ownership and responsibility for building that inclusive culture.
Yeah. So certainly infusing our own culture with all sorts of different people and perspectives has helped to just kind of reset the balance internally a little bit. But making sure that those are coming from a diverse way is kind of step one. But then secondly, there's accountability, right? So as a manager, whenever somebody on my team is hiring or is going through a recruitment process, we make sure that, hey, do you have a diverse slate of candidates? Because you cannot even start your interview process until we're sure you have a diverse slate and that you've personally gone out and connected with different people on LinkedIn and found a wider array of people and backgrounds to bring in. And so every one-on-one conversation between manager and direct report, every team meeting that we have, we try to dedicate a portion of that to how are we doing on this? Let's have a conversation. Are you having a hard time finding, a diverse range of candidates? Why is that? Where are you looking? That kind of thing. So it stays part of the culture in a very casual way, and it stays part of the accountability system in a very standardized way. Yep. And I think we kind of have to attack it from both ends.
It's great. I love the intentionality behind it. I came into this a fan of HubSpot. I will leave this a fan of you and a fan of the culture that you're fostering over there. So now, Meghan, now that I've got to pick your brain a little bit and see what I could get out of it, I am interested in what you are putting in it. So I'd like to know a little bit about a book you've read recently, a blog you follow, something you've listened to that just got you excited or informed your approach. What are you consuming these days?
All right. So on this topic, there's this woman named Joy Buolamwini who speaks and writes a lot about bias and algorithms and how things like facial recognition and the single choices that creators make in designing algorithms can actually embed bias into our internet and into the way that we consume content. She's she's got a great blog. She has done a TED Talk. I consume everything she puts out. She actually has this really cool organization called the Algorithmic Justice League, which I think is really interesting. And she's not the only one writing about this stuff, but I think that as AI becomes a bigger and bigger piece of our technological landscape, as we outsource more and more decisions to technology, these sorts of questions are going to become incredibly important. There's Amazon has been working already with sort of like police units around facial recognition and using kind of mass data consumption to help with trends. And, they're rightly having conversations and figuring out the right way to do this, but we're there now, right? Like we are in the future and we need to make sure that the inputs that we're putting into it aren't exacerbating inherent biases that we already have. So Joy does a fantastic job giving a primer on that stuff. This is not recent, but on the flip side of that, there's a guy named Clive Thompson who wrote a book called Smarter Than You Think that is kind of an optimistic view of what technology can do for us. I think I sort of waffle between feeling like we're saving the world and we're harming the world. And so I kind of need to balance out my sources of support there. And Clive has, it's not rose-colored glasses. He definitely looks at both sides, but he sort of decides to land on the side of optimism in terms of what's ahead of us in terms of technology. And so I've always really liked his writing. That book is a few years old now, and I'm sure I actually think he has a new one coming out this summer, but I like his writing on tech. And then I'll throw in a plug for someone who's completely not related to work, but who I'm obsessed with as just a writer. This guy named Hanif Abdurraqib, who literally you can see, I don't know if this is going to be a video or an audio podcast, but behind me on my wall is a quote from one of his books. Probably just one of the best. He writes essays on music and society, and probably just one of the best writers that I've read in quite some time. And I always try to promote him wherever I can get him because I think he's just exceptional.
Good stuff. Thank you for sharing that with us. I know folks are going to be, interested in following along with what you guys are doing over at HubSpot and what you're doing as your 8 years grows and grows.
Yeah.
How can folks connect with you, Meghan?
Certainly on Twitter. I'm just at Meg H. Keaney, spelled Keaney, on Twitter. You can try on LinkedIn, but I never, ever look at LinkedIn. It's an awesome site. I just never have time to go through that stuff. So Twitter is probably the best bet. And then you can listen to me if you want to hear more on The Growth Show. So we have a podcast called The Growth Show. It's a lot of fun. We interview companies about how they're deciding to grow better, not just bigger. So making sure that they stick to principles and that they've got a good relationship with their customers. Some really interesting stories on that. And then my colleague, Sam, has a very funny, very cool podcast called Weird Work that's about to kick off too. So that's the gamut.
I'll be checking both of those out. Thanks again for coming in and talking with us about this. It's a super important topic, and I thought you gave some really, really valuable insights into what folks can do and how it can be effective and successful.
No problem. And listen, we're all learning along the way. I stumble in this stuff all the time. I get smarter. I learn. So I'm happy to be figuring it out as we go.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.